Sometimes the people we dismiss as outsiders are the very ones protecting us from the inside. In a world where language barriers become weapons of discrimination, one DMV worker learned that assumptions about citizenship and belonging can destroy careers in an instant. This is the story of a woman who endured hours of humiliation while hiding one of the most powerful positions in American law enforcement. What happened when her true identity was revealed would become a viral sensation that exposed the ugly reality of how immigrants are treated in everyday government offices. If stories like this remind you that respect should never depend on someone's accent or appearance, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. They thought she was an immigrant, a young woman waiting in line at the DMV, speaking broken English with disorganized documents. The clerk made her wait for hours and mocked her. Then FBI agents arrived and respectfully saluted the woman, shocking everyone. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, please subscribe for more moments where dignity triumphs over discrimination and where true identity shatters every assumption. The Department of Motor Vehicles office in downtown Phoenix operated with all the efficiency of a broken clock and twice the hostility of a maximum security prison. The building itself was a testament to 1970s government architecture. Beige concrete walls, small windows that barely let in natural light, and an interior design philosophy that seemed deliberately calculated to crush the human spirit. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with the persistence of angry wasps, casting a harsh, unflattering glare on cracked linoleum floors that had witnessed decades of frustrated citizens shuffling through bureaucratic nightmares. Plastic chairs, each one designed to become uncomfortable after exactly 15 minutes of sitting, were arranged in rigid rows facing service windows protected by bulletproof glass, thick enough to stop a small caliber bullet. The message was clear. The state assumed its citizens were dangerous, and the citizens had learned to assume the state was hostile. Digital queue displays showed wait times that consistently exceeded 3 hours, while a single functioning coffee machine dispensed liquid that barely qualified as drinkable for the desperate price of $2 per cup. The air conditioning had broken down again on this sweltering Tuesday morning in July, leaving the waiting area stifling hot and tempers even shorter than usual. Phoenix summers were notorious for their brutality, with temperatures regularly exceeding 115 degrees. But inside the DMV, the combination of human body heat, malfunctioning climate control, and bureaucratic frustration created an atmosphere that felt like purgatory with paperwork. Most of the DMV staff moved with the deliberate slowness of people who understood that their customers had no choice but to wait, no alternatives to pursue, and no recourse if service was slow, rude, or incompetent. Job security through monopoly had created a culture where efficiency was optional and courtesy was extinct. Behind window number 4 sat Derek Martinez, a 34-year-old DMV clerk who had worked at this particular location for 8 years of what he privately considered noble service to the state of Arizona. Derek had grown up in South Phoenix, in a neighborhood where his Mexican-American family had struggled with poverty, language barriers, and the constant challenge of proving their belonging in a state where immigration politics dominated every election cycle. Rather than developing empathy from his family's struggles, Derek had chosen a different path. He had embraced what he called earning respect through assimilation, which translated into aggressive enforcement of English language requirements, suspicious scrutiny of anyone who reminded him of his own family's vulnerable past. Derek took particular satisfaction in what he privately termed maintaining standards, his personal interpretation of immigration enforcement that went far beyond his actual job description, but gave him a sense of power and belonging that his childhood had lacked. In Derek's carefully constructed worldview, Too many people were taking advantage of American systems without earning the right through proper cultural assimilation and linguistic competence. He saw himself as an unofficial gatekeeper protecting taxpayer resources from those who hadn't demonstrated sufficient commitment to American values, which in his mind were primarily expressed through perfect English and unquestioning compliance with bureaucratic procedures. Derek had developed a sophisticated system for categorizing customers that allowed him to provide dramatically different levels of service based on his assessment of their worthiness and potential threat to what he considered proper order. Citizens with perfect English, confident demeanor, and obvious familiarity with American bureaucratic procedures received efficient, professional service. Those who struggled with language, seemed uncertain about procedures, or displayed what Derek interpreted as foreign mannerisms, faced extended questioning, additional requirements, and deliberate delays that he justified as thorough verification and proper security protocols. That's when she entered his line, and everything Derek thought he knew about power, belonging, and judgment would be challenged in the most devastating way imaginable. FBI Director Maria Castellanos walked into the Phoenix DMV with the measured pace of someone who understood that this visit would test her patience and professional composure in ways that congressional hearings, cabinet briefings, and national security crises never could. At 32, Maria had spent 11 years with the Bureau, rising through the ranks with unprecedented speed to become the youngest director in FBI history. Her appointment had been controversial, not just because of her age, but because she represented a new generation of law enforcement leadership that prioritized civil rights, community engagement, and systemic reform over traditional enforcement approaches. Maria was fluent in 6 languages, held advanced degrees in law and international relations from Georgetown, and had personally led counterterrorism operations in 3 different countries. She could brief the president on national security threats in the morning and testify before Congress about civil rights violations in the afternoon, switching seamlessly between roles that required different skills, different languages, and different aspects of her complex professional identity. But today she was here for a very specific and personally challenging purpose that required her to conceal all of these qualifications and pretend to be something she had never been: vulnerable, uncertain, and dependent on the goodwill of bureaucratic authority. Maria was conducting what the Bureau called operational assessment, personally experiencing the treatment that immigrant communities reported receiving at various government agencies. Recent complaints about discriminatory practices at DMV offices throughout the Southwest had reached the federal level through civil rights organizations, congressional inquiries, and internal Justice Department investigations. The pattern was consistent: citizens and legal residents with accents, non-Anglo names, or uncertain command of bureaucratic English faced delays, additional requirements, and humiliating treatment that violated both professional standards and constitutional principles. But intelligence gathered through official channels could only reveal so much about the daily reality of discrimination that immigrant communities faced. Formal complaints were filtered through legal language and bureaucratic processes that sanitized the emotional and psychological impact of being treated as unwelcome in your own country. Maria had decided that the only way to truly understand the scope of the problem was to experience it firsthand, to feel the weight of prejudice and powerlessness that shaped millions of Americans' interactions with their own government. The decision to conduct undercover operations had not been made lightly. Maria's security detail had objected strenuously to any situation that placed her in uncontrolled civilian environments without protection. Her legal advisors had warned about potential entrapment issues and the ethical complications of deceptive government operations. Her political advisors had calculated the career-ending risks if the operation became public knowledge before achieving its intended policy goals. But Maria had overruled all objections with the authority that had made her legendary within the Bureau. She had risen to her position through field operations, not political maneuvering, and she understood that leadership sometimes required personal risk in service of larger principles. If she was going to reform discriminatory practices in government agencies, she needed evidence that no one could dismiss as hearsay, exaggeration, or political manipulation. For this operation, Maria had dressed deliberately in clothing designed to signal economic vulnerability and cultural foreignness. She wore a simple floral blouse that had been carefully aged to appear worn, dark jeans that fit well but showed their age through faded areas and small repairs, and practical shoes that suggested someone who walked everywhere because they couldn't afford reliable transportation. Her usually perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, secured with a basic elastic band, and she carried a canvas purse that appeared to have seen extensive use. Most importantly, Maria was prepared to speak only halting, heavily accented English throughout her visit. Despite her complete fluency and advanced education, this deception weighed heavily on her conscience. As someone whose own grandparents had struggled with similar language barriers during their immigration from El Salvador, but the operation required authenticity that could only be achieved through personal experience of the discrimination that accent and language struggles invited from petty officials. The documents in Maria's purse had been carefully prepared by the Bureau's Technical Services Division to appear authentic but disorganized. They included a driver's license issued under her operational identity, utility bills and rental agreements that established Arizona residency, employment records from a cleaning service that provided her cover story, and various forms that had been deliberately filled out with small errors and corrections that suggested someone unfamiliar with bureaucratic English requirements. Derek noticed Maria immediately as she approached his window, his practiced eye cataloging what he perceived as warning signs that triggered his personal prejudices and professional suspicions. He saw a young woman, perhaps early 30s, with obvious Latina features and nervous demeanor, clutching a disorganized collection of papers in a way that suggested she was uncertain about procedures and requirements. In Derek's experience, such customers required extensive additional scrutiny to prevent fraud, ensure compliance with documentation requirements, and maintain the standards that he believed protected legitimate citizens from being overwhelmed by people who didn't belong. The contrast between Maria's simple appearance and the well-dressed, confident customers who typically received Derek's efficient service was stark and immediately apparent to him. Other people in line wore business attire that suggested professional employment, carried leather portfolios, or designer handbags that indicated disposable income, and moved with the easy confidence of people who expected bureaucratic systems to serve them rather than obstruct them. Maria's understated presentation stood out like what Derek considered a discordant note in an otherwise predictable symphony of proper American citizenship. In his mind, people who could afford vehicle registrations and license renewals simply didn't appear uncertain about procedures or struggle with official forms. The apparent contradiction between her legal presence and modest presentation triggered his suspicions about potential fraud or illegal status. "Next," Derek called, though he made no effort to look up from his computer screen as Maria approached his window. He continued typing for several additional seconds, a deliberate display of his authority and her unimportance in his daily routine. "Hello," Maria said, carefully modulating her voice to sound uncertain and heavily accented, while suppressing her natural confidence and linguistic competence. "I need, how you say, renew license for driving." Derek's expression immediately shifted to barely concealed irritation, mixed with what he considered professional suspicion. He had been hoping for a simple transaction that would allow him to maintain his processing quotas without excessive effort or complicated verification procedures. Instead, He was facing what appeared to be another time-consuming case that would require patient explanation, additional documentation, and careful scrutiny to ensure compliance with state requirements. Driver's license renewal, Derek corrected, with exaggerated patience, speaking slowly and loudly, as if Maria's accent indicated hearing problems rather than linguistic differences. Do you have your current license, proof of Arizona residency, and immigration status documentation? The final requirement wasn't actually necessary for routine license renewal, but Derek had learned that demanding additional documentation often intimidated customers who might be hiding something and provided him with additional opportunities to demonstrate his authority and thoroughness. Maria fumbled through her canvas purse with deliberate clumsiness, taking longer than necessary to locate the required documents while observing Derek's body language and noting his assumptions for her eventual report. She produced her current license, issued under the operational identity that the Bureau had created specifically for this investigation, along with utility bills, rental agreements, and employment records that appeared authentic but had been carefully prepared to withstand scrutiny while supporting her cover story. I have papers, Maria said, spreading the documents across the narrow counter in a way that appeared disorganized and confused. This one, for electric company. This one, for, how you say, apartment, where I live. Derek barely glanced at the documents before pushing them back toward Maria with obvious annoyance and theatrical impatience. These need to be organized properly and presented in the correct order. I can't process applications when documents are scattered randomly across my workspace. Don't they teach basic organization skills in your home country? The comment was clearly intended to intimidate and humiliate, while also establishing Derek's assumption that Maria was foreign-born despite her Arizona license and residential documentation. Around them, other customers in line began to notice the extended interaction and Derek's increasingly hostile tone, though most seemed reluctant to intervene in what appeared to be an official government procedure. "I'm sorry," Maria said, carefully reorganizing the papers according to Derek's implied requirements, while mentally documenting his unprofessional behavior for the comprehensive report she would later submit to the Justice Department. "English very hard for me. I try to learn better." "Well, you're in America now," Derek replied, loudly enough for other customers to hear clearly, his voice carrying the tone of someone making an important point about cultural expectations and national priorities. "American citizens speak English properly. If you can't handle basic communication requirements, maybe you shouldn't be driving on our roads where you might not understand traffic signs or police instructions." Several customers shifted uncomfortably in line, recognizing that Derek's behavior was crossing professional boundaries and moving into territory that felt discriminatory and inappropriate. But the atmosphere of bureaucratic authority and the knowledge that they needed their own transactions processed successfully made intervention seem risky and potentially counterproductive. An elderly man, wearing a veteran's cap, shook his head disapprovingly, but said nothing. A young mother with two small children looked embarrassed by Derek's behavior, but focused on keeping her children quiet rather than challenging his treatment of Maria. A businessman in an expensive suit checked his phone impatiently, clearly annoyed by the delay, but unwilling to involve himself in what he probably viewed as someone else's problem. Derek spent the next 30 minutes examining Maria's documents with unnecessary thoroughness that went far beyond routine verification procedures. He questioned every detail, required explanations for information that was clearly legitimate, and demanded additional clarification for standard residential and employment documentation that would have been accepted without comment for other customers. "Date of birth," Derek said, pointing to a section of the renewal form with obvious irritation. "This needs to be written clearly in the standard American format. Month, day, year, with clear numerical notation. Can you understand that requirement, or do you need me to provide visual examples? Maria rewrote the date according to Derek's instructions, while observing other customers who were being processed quickly and courteously at neighboring windows by staff members who understood that efficiency and professionalism were supposed to be the standards for government service. The contrast in treatment was stark and would form a central element of her eventual report on discriminatory practices that violated both departmental policies and constitutional principles. Place of birth, Derek continued, studying the form as if he were examining evidence of fraud or deception. You wrote Los Angeles, California. Is that information accurate? Or are you attempting to claim citizenship status that you don't actually possess? The question was particularly ironic, given that Maria had indeed been born in Los Angeles and was not only a natural-born American citizen, but held one of the highest-ranking positions in federal law enforcement. But she maintained her operational persona while noting Derek's automatic assumption that anyone with an accent couldn't possibly be a native-born American citizen. Is true, Maria said quietly, speaking in the halting, uncertain manner that her role required. I born in Los Angeles, but family move when I was small child. I come back now for better life and opportunity. Derek spent another 20 minutes questioning Maria about her background, employment history, family circumstances, and reasons for living in Arizona. None of these questions were relevant to driver's license renewal procedures, but he seemed determined to establish his authority while making the process as difficult and humiliating as possible. Employment verification, Derek announced, though such documentation wasn't required for routine license renewal, and demanding it violated departmental policies about equal treatment of customers. How do I know you're working legally and contributing to tax revenues like the rest of us law-abiding citizens? Maria produced a pay stub from the cleaning company that served as her operational cover, another carefully crafted element of the Bureau's elaborate investigation setup. Derek examined the document with suspicious intensity, as if he might discover evidence of fraud, illegal employment, or tax evasion that would justify his discriminatory treatment. Domestic cleaning service, Derek read aloud with obvious disdain and cultural superiority. Typical. You people always take jobs that Americans don't want, then complain about wages and working conditions, instead of developing better skills and qualifications. The comment revealed Derek's deep-seated prejudices about immigration, employment, and cultural hierarchy, and would later become a central piece of evidence in the discrimination complaint that would end his career and trigger statewide policy reforms. Maria maintained her calm, submissive demeanor while mentally documenting every aspect of his unprofessional behavior for the comprehensive report that would expose systematic discrimination in government agencies. By this point, Maria had been at Derek's window for over 90 minutes, during which time he had processed 8 other customers with routine efficiency that demonstrated his capability for professional service when he chose to provide it. The difference in treatment was obvious to everyone in the waiting area, though most people seemed reluctant to intervene in what appeared to be an official government procedure with potential legal implications. I need to verify this information with my supervisor, Derek announced, though no such verification was required for straightforward license renewal, and his statement was simply another fabrication designed to extend Maria's humiliation. You'll need to take a seat and wait until I can confirm your eligibility and status. Maria understood that Derek was deliberately extending her wait time as a form of harassment and power demonstration, but she complied with his instructions and took a seat in the crowded waiting area. Other customers gave her curious glances that ranged from sympathetic to judgmental, with some clearly reflecting the same prejudices that Derek had displayed so openly. For the next 3 hours, Maria watched Derek process dozens of other customers, while occasionally glancing in her direction with obvious satisfaction at making her wait indefinitely. He seemed to be enjoying the demonstration of bureaucratic power over someone he viewed as vulnerable and unable to complain effectively about discriminatory treatment. During this extended wait, Maria observed the entire DMV operation with the analytical eye of a federal law enforcement professional conducting an official investigation. She noted which staff members provided professional service regardless of customers' language skills, apparent economic status, or ethnic background, and which ones displayed patterns of discriminatory behavior, similar to Derek's obviously prejudiced approach. She watched a middle-aged white businessman receive immediate service, despite arriving 2 hours after her. She observed an elderly Anglo woman get patient assistance with forms that were far more complicated than Maria's simple renewal application. She noted that customers with obvious accents or uncertain English were consistently directed to Derek's window, while those who appeared economically comfortable and linguistically confident were routed to other clerks who provided efficient, respectful service. The pattern was unmistakable and would become the foundation for systemic reforms that would transform DMV operations throughout the Southwest. But for now, Maria had to maintain her operational persona while enduring treatment that violated every principle of equal protection and professional government service. At 3:45 p.m., nearly 5 hours after her arrival, Derek finally called Maria back to his window with the theatrical air of someone doing her an enormous favor that she should appreciate, regardless of the unconscionable delay. "I've completed my review of your application and supporting documentation," Derek announced, though he had clearly spent most of the intervening time on routine tasks rather than any special verification procedures. "There are still some significant problems with your documentation that need to be resolved before I can approve your renewal." Maria approached the window with the same patient demeanor she had maintained throughout this ordeal, though internally she was calculating the policy changes and training reforms that Derek's behavior would trigger throughout the state system. "What problems?" she asked, in her carefully modulated accent, maintaining the operational persona that had enabled this investigation. "Your birth certificate copy isn't properly certified," Derek lied, knowing that Maria would have difficulty challenging his fabricated assertion without revealing knowledge of procedures that would contradict her assumed ignorance. "You'll need to obtain an official certified copy directly from Los Angeles County Vital Records before I can process your renewal application." The requirement was completely fabricated. Maria's documentation was more than adequate for routine license renewal, but Derek was counting on her apparent vulnerability and linguistic limitations to prevent effective challenge to his authority. "How long this take?" Maria asked, though she already understood that Derek was creating unnecessary obstacles designed to discourage her from pursuing legitimate government services. "Could be weeks," Derek said, with obvious satisfaction and barely concealed malice. "Maybe several months, depending on California's processing times and your ability to navigate their requirements. Government offices move slowly, especially when dealing with complicated cases like yours that require additional verification." That's when the front doors of the DMV opened, and 4 individuals in dark business suits entered the waiting area with the purposeful stride that immediately identified them as federal law enforcement officers. They moved with synchronized precision, their eyes scanning the room with professional assessment, while their bearing commanded immediate attention from everyone present. Each wore nearly identical attire, black suits, conservative ties, and the unmistakable bearing of people accustomed to unquestioned authority in government settings. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh led the team, followed by Special Agent Michael Rodriguez, Special Agent Sarah Kim, and Special Agent David Thompson. They had been monitoring Maria's location through discreet electronic surveillance and had arrived according to a predetermined schedule that would allow her undercover operation to conclude naturally while providing maximum evidentiary impact for the discrimination she had documented. The four agents approached Derek's service window with professional efficiency and obvious federal authority, their credentials clearly visible in black leather folders that immediately identified them as FBI personnel. The sight of multiple federal agents entering a routine DMV office immediately changed the atmosphere of the entire building, with staff members and customers alike recognizing that something significant and potentially career-ending was about to happen. "Excuse me," Agent Walsh said to Derek, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of federal authority that could not be ignored or dismissed. "We need to speak with the customer you're currently serving." Derek looked confused and increasingly nervous, glancing from the federal agents to Maria and back again, while processing the implications of FBI involvement in what he had assumed was a routine harassment of someone powerless to complain effectively. "This woman," Derek stammered, his voice barely audible, as the reality of the situation began to penetrate his prejudiced assumptions. "She's just trying to renew her driver's license. Is there some kind of federal investigation or security concern?" Agent Rodriguez approached Maria with obvious respect and barely concealed relief that her ordeal was finally ending, offering a slight nod that acknowledged her authority while maintaining operational security until she chose to reveal her identity. "Director Castellanos," he said formally, "we have secure transportation ready for your immediate return to headquarters." The words hit Derek like a sledgehammer to his professional confidence and personal worldview. His face drained of all color as he processed the implications of what he had just heard. The woman he had been harassing, humiliating, and discriminating against for over 5 hours was apparently a director of something important enough to warrant FBI escort and federal protection. "Director?" Derek whispered, his voice cracking with the strain of recognizing that his career was effectively over. Agent Kim stepped forward, addressing Maria with the professional respect due to her actual position, while making Derek's error unmistakably clear to everyone within hearing distance. "Ma'am, Assistant Director Chen has requested an immediate debrief regarding your operational assessment. The Attorney General is waiting for your preliminary report on discriminatory practices in government agencies." Maria allowed her carefully maintained persona to fall away like a discarded costume, straightening to her full height and speaking in the clear, unaccented English that reflected her education, authority, years of commanding respect in the highest levels of American government. "Thank you, Agent Kim," she said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of command that had made her legendary within federal law enforcement circles. "I believe I've gathered more than sufficient evidence for a comprehensive report on systematic discrimination in state government services." Derek's hands began to tremble visibly as the reality of the situation became undeniably clear. He had spent hours deliberately harassing and humiliating the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, creating documented evidence of his own discriminatory behavior in front of multiple witnesses, and unknowingly recording devices that had captured every word of their interactions. Other DMV staff members had gathered to observe the unprecedented scene of federal agents escorting someone from their office, while clearly treating her as a superior authority figure. Customers throughout the waiting area pulled out phones to record what they recognized as a moment of historical significance, sensing that they were witnessing something that would likely have far-reaching consequences for government accountability and civil rights enforcement. "Director Castellanos," Agent Walsh said with formal respect, "your secure vehicle is ready for immediate departure. We've also prepared preliminary documentation of today's interactions for inclusion in your official report to the Justice Department." Maria nodded professionally, then turned to face Derek directly. Her expression carried no anger or vindictiveness, Only the calm authority of someone who had spent years in federal law enforcement and understood both the weight of evidence and the importance of justice for violations of civil rights. "Mr. Martinez," she said, reading his name tag, with the same attention to detail that had made her an exceptional investigator. "I want you to understand completely that every interaction we've had today has been thoroughly documented and recorded through multiple methods. Your discriminatory treatment of what you believe to be a vulnerable immigrant seeking basic government services will be included in a comprehensive federal report on systematic discrimination in state agencies." Derek opened his mouth to speak, but found that no words would come. His throat felt completely dry, and his hands continued to tremble as the full magnitude of his error and its consequences became apparent to him. "The language you used, the unnecessary delays you imposed, the fabricated requirements you invented, and the deliberate humiliation you attempted to inflict represent exactly the kind of systematic discrimination that federal civil rights laws were designed to eliminate from government services." Maria continued, with prosecutorial precision. "Your behavior today will serve as primary evidence in policy reforms designed to protect all citizens from the abuse of bureaucratic authority." Agent Thompson had been discreetly photographing the scene and recording witness information, understanding that Derek's discriminatory behavior would likely result in both immediate employment termination and potential federal prosecution for violation of civil rights under color of government authority. Maria gathered her documents, now revealed to be part of an elaborate federal civil rights investigation, rather than the confused paperwork of a struggling immigrant, and prepared to leave with her federal escort team, while the entire DMV office watched in stunned silence. "The Department of Justice will be in direct contact with your supervisor and the Arizona Department of Transportation regarding today's events and their implications for statewide policy reform," she informed Derek with the finality of someone announcing the end of his career. "I strongly recommend you begin considering alternative employment opportunities immediately." As Maria walked toward the exit, accompanied by her FBI escort team, the entire DMV office remained completely silent, except for the sound of cell phone cameras recording this moment of justice and accountability. Customers who had witnessed Derek's hours of discriminatory behavior began to understand that they had observed a sophisticated federal law enforcement operation designed to expose exactly the kind of systematic prejudice that millions of Americans experience daily in government offices. Derek remained frozen at his service window, still processing the devastating reality that his career in government service was permanently over. His discriminatory treatment of someone he had assumed was a powerless immigrant had actually been directed at one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the United States government. Within hours, video footage of the FBI director's identity revelation had been posted to social media platforms by dozens of witnesses. The story quickly went viral, with millions of viewers expressing both outrage at Derek's systematic discrimination and admiration for Maria's dedication to understanding prejudice firsthand through personal experience. The Arizona Department of Transportation announced Derek's immediate termination the following morning, along with implementation of comprehensive anti-discrimination training programs designed to prevent similar violations of civil rights and professional standards throughout the state system. Director Maria Castellanos returned to FBI headquarters, where her detailed report on government agency discrimination would lead to significant federal policy reforms and training initiatives across multiple state and federal agencies. Her willingness to personally experience systematic discrimination had provided invaluable evidence for addressing problems that affected millions of Americans daily, but were often dismissed as exaggeration or political manipulation. The story became far more than just a viral video. It became a catalyst for national examination of how language barriers And immigration status assumptions are weaponized by petty officials to deny basic services to people who deserve dignity and respect, regardless of their accent, appearance, or assumed background. For Derek Martinez, the incident served as a devastating reminder that assumptions about power and vulnerability can be completely wrong, and that treating people with disrespect based on prejudice carries consequences that extend far beyond the moment of discrimination and can destroy entire careers in an instant. But perhaps most importantly, it reminded everyone who heard the story that true leadership is often found in those who choose to experience injustice firsthand in order to fight it more effectively, and that respect and dignity should never depend on someone's accent, appearance, or assumptions about their immigration status or social position.